Hello everyone, good day to all of you. Wanted to give some recommendations I have today for selecting an AR style of stock. I have quite a few here on the table that I will be talking about, but I'm also going to be talking about a lot more that I've tried over the years and that I've owned, and just going to kind of gear this mostly as somewhat of a beginner's guide, but regardless of your skill level or your own familiarity or anything like that, I think there will be a lot of good information here regardless. So how I'm going to be talking about this is I'm just going to go from what I consider to be the most to least important features on stocks, as well as kind of along the way talking about some features that I don't like, because I think you can get kind of so feature rich or attempt to on a stock that it's actually a detriment. So very first and foremost, the by far most important point of stocks that I look for is the adjustment lever placement. So I do have, most of these on the table today are HK stocks, but same will apply, of course, with every AR stock. It's just these are what I have on hand, and I've kind of gotten rid of everything else over the years. But take this Viltor stock, for instance. You can see this is the adjustment lever here. Of course, you just push this down, and then you can adjust this back and forth to adjust your length of pull for whether you're wearing body armor or not, or just, to get it to your optimal length of pull for normal shooting. What is important is that this one is nice and flush with the stock itself. You can see it also has this little bar in the center, so you have to actually deliberately press on either side to get it to collapse or to pull it out further. The reason that's important, if you compare it to like your standard M4 type of stock, or the SOP mod, some of those types of stocks as well, if you were trying to shoot long range and you take a bag and you're using your rear bag back here for your stock support, you have your hand back there and everything, very easy. Or I guess even if you're not using a bag but you are shooting long range and you have your hand back there, it's very easy to accidentally press that lever on the normal type of stocks that have that regular just exposed adjustment lever, push that in, and then it knocks your whole stock in and you're totally messed up with your length of pull and your eye relief and everything. So it's much easier to just find a stock that avoids that. A lot of stocks have ways around that. For example, Magpul, that's going to be one that will come up quite a bit in this video, because they're overall quite a good stock, despite the fact I don't have one here, the reasons for which I will discuss later. But something that has either a lock that will prevent the adjustment lever from being pushed accidentally when you don't want it to, or just a adjustment lever that's already out of the way. So as I said already, Viltor one kind of has that piece of polymer built in the middle there, and it's also already flush. The HK stocks are just totally flush, you can see here, and it's almost like the inverse of those Viltor stocks, where you have to actually push inside of this little section here to actually depress the adjustment lever. Different approaches, both work perfectly fine, but just having something where it's out of the way is what's important. And while I have this stock bag here, I did want to also, this is a good point to talk about those kind of really feature-rich precision stocks. Personally, I think, and I do a fair amount of longer range shooting, I think even then, even if you're going to be mostly doing long range shooting, I don't think it's worth getting, for example, the PRS stock. I think those are way too much of an attempt to try to put a bunch of features onto a stock, and then it just, obvious detriment there is it's insanely heavy, and it just doesn't really do, I think, anything that it's supposed to do too well, whereas if they just went with kind of a more basic streamlined design, it would do things a lot better. So the appeal for those kind of more intense, longer range precision shooting stocks is that they'll usually have a part down here, which obviously none of these do, but they'll either have an M-LOK section or a Picatinny section on a lot of the older ones, where you can mount a monopod. Now personally, I've shot with monopods, I've used those types of stocks, and I just don't think a monopod comes close to the amount of support as a bag does. So I think you're better off with a bag, and if you're not going to be running a monopod on your stock, that does open up a lot more options for just the more lighter weight, much simpler, just type of collapsible carbine types of stocks like all of these are. And I really don't think that the benefits outweigh the cons on those types of longer, or designed for longer range types of stocks. I think you can shoot perfectly fine, not even fine, I think you can shoot very well long range if you have the correct fundamentals with just a regular stock. And of course, weight, with me, if you've watched any of my videos, pretty much that is just a huge sticking point for me, is the weight, because I hunt with pretty much all my rifles, and something that weighs a lot is just it's not something you're going to want to carry. So any way to save weight that doesn't really negatively impact the performance is something that I would want. And talking about weight, that does also tie into my next point, which is the overall shape of the stock itself. So I have two stocks here that are pretty much the crane style, SOP mod style of stock, which just means that it has this bigger cheek piece right here. Viltor one is pretty famous for that, and then of course I have this older HK one, which you can see very, very similar design. Now, one benefit, if you want storage on your stock, generally, not always, these kind of cheek pieces here can be used as a storage compartment, as is the case with this Viltor. The downside, however, is these are heavy. Now, both of these stocks are a bit dated. There are newer stock designs that still retain this crane style of cheek piece, but they are lighter weight. But even then, they are always going to be heavier than just your simple type of profile where it just comes straight back. And for the longest time, when I first got this Viltor, you know, I really, this is nice. This definitely does feel really nice to have this extra cheek weld that you get with something like this profile, but again, it comes back to the weight. I don't think it's worth the extra weight because I can still get a very, very good cheek weld with just a normal profile as well. Nothing wrong with that. And then you're saving several ounces generally. So if you can find one that has that bigger cheek piece and it's nice and light and, you know, fits for your needs, and especially if you want to use it for storage, then by all means it's a good choice. But otherwise, I don't think it's a very required feature, and personally I'd rather go without it just to save that extra weight. But also on the shape, one other key feature to avoid is don't have a sort of a hook shaped type of stock. Now this one is almost sort of like that. Now, one of them that I had in the past that actually did have an issue with that was the MFT minimalist stock, which was super nice and light, but they just reduced the whole profile to where there was just kind of like a butt pad sticking down and then your regular stock piece there. The amount of times that I snagged that specific stock on stuff as I was just doing regular, you know, shooting activities was a lot, and it got really annoying. So it needs to be pretty like genuinely hook shaped for it to be an actual issue. This is called a club foot stock, and these don't really have an issue with snagging on anything. It's really if you just have kind of just not much material specifically down here and it does jut down quite a bit, that's when you'll run into an issue. So most stocks will not have that issue. Some of the minimalist stock, as I said earlier, definitely has an issue, and a lot of those just sort of minimalist-esque super lightweight stocks will have an issue. So speaking of weight, don't go so lightweight to where you start sacrificing the features that are important. I also know that there are some stocks where they try to go so lightweight and so minimalist that they end up reducing the butt pad. It is important to have a nice butt pad. This one here is a little bit on the wider side, but really the part that matters the most is just how long it is. But also on the note of butt pads, one other important feature that I would recommend looking at is the angle that the butt pad sits at. I know that there are a few stocks, I cannot remember the names of them, but there are a few where they actually curve inwards. If you look at this HK stock here, this does ever so slightly. I've never actually had an issue with this one because it's so little, but the stocks that actually curve in, they might feel more comfortable when you're shooting with just regular clothes, but the major issue with those, especially if you start wearing body armor with them, becomes very, very difficult to put that stock into your shoulder pocket properly. It just becomes kind of a mess and it wants to slip around everywhere. Generally, what I've found to be the nicest, I am partial to this specific stock design, in particular the slimline, where it's just kind of a gradual slant. You can see right there. But nothing wrong at all with these types of stocks either, where it's still somewhat slanted here, but then it does also kind of curve inwards towards the bottom as well. This type of design can help if you do low ready, to kind of roll it up from low ready, because literally it rolls with you a bit more. Another important feature, going back to this bag specifically, again for longer range usage, is you'll want one that has a kind of a bigger, what I usually would call a shelf down here. So just kind of a flat section where you can rest the bag itself when you're propping it up. Not all stocks have this. All the ones I have here do have a pretty good shelf. Has to be both kind of wide and also kind of longer. But regardless, you really don't need much of a shelf to still effectively use a bag. Just something there will work quite well if you start doing longer range. So I wouldn't worry too much about looking for something that's, as pronounced as this one isn't necessary. It is nice to have, but any of these I found work perfectly. So starting to get into some of the less important features now. One thing that I personally do like to have on all of my stocks is a window. You can see each of these has a little window just cut out right here. I wouldn't bother, if you find a really good stock and it doesn't have the window, I would absolutely say it's not a deal breaker. For one, you can, if you really want, you can just drill a hole here. Now the benefit of having this window is you can either witness mark your buffer tube through this window, or if you have a buffer tube that's numbered, you can actually just see which number you're adjusted to through here. Then if you need to make any adjustments to your length of pull, for if you're wearing body armor for instance, and then once you're done wearing body armor you want to set it back, you can just remember that number or just find the witness mark again and set it and forget it. But the reason that that's not really important is because if you were going to witness mark in this window, you could just witness mark kind of a line in front of the stock too. It works perfectly fine. Maybe looks slightly less refined, but it works just as well. So I wouldn't worry at all about the witness mark window whatsoever. Another feature that is worth considering, especially if you live in a wetter state, is if the stock has a method of draining. But I'm in a pretty dry state personally, so usually that's not too big of a concern for me. If it is a concern generally, you can drill some holes into your buffer tube as well, just like in the notches where it adjusts, and that usually should be fine unless you're actually swimming in the ocean or something like that. And then the last point that is least important for me personally, but it's probably going to be for a lot of people a point that you'll want to really consider, is the sling attachment points available on the stock. So these two HK stocks here just have a direct thread, as you can see, just a little hole there. The Viltor has a direct thread up here, as well as the QD cup socket. Personally, I am always a much bigger fan of direct threading slings because it is quieter, but I do understand there is a valid reason for using a QD. For example, if you're only using it on one rifle and you just switch it between, that's fine. Personally, I would recommend getting one sling for each of your rifles, but another good reason that I have heard, which may apply to you as well, is if you need to ditch your sling really quickly in case it gets stuck on something, then a QD, it's kind of in the name, then you can just quickly remove it and you're not snagged on whatever you're snagged on. But either way, that's going to be a compromise on whether you want it to be quieter or just have a little bit more noise and have a QD, and it also just depends on how you want to run your sling. As I said, personally I usually prefer to do an end plate attachment just because it feels more comfortable to me, but if you want to go all the way back on the stock, then you will definitely want to look for one that has whatever sling attachment points you want to use. On the sling attachment points also, try to make sure, and it's going to be, in some cases a little hard to gauge, but generally think about where you're going to be shouldering the rifle, and if there is a sling attachment point, for example right here, think about if that might interfere with your cheek weld, because this one does, 100%. This one, even though it has a similar sort of loop, it is at the top, so it hasn't really ever caused an issue for me. But the more low profile of a sling attachment point you can get generally is better. And last, just as a bit of advice, as I do want this to kind of be a beginner's guide, if you are wondering about the difference between a mil-spec and a commercial buffer tube, the easiest way to figure that out, there's a lot of ways you can measure it, but you take the stock off of your buffer tube and you just look at the rear of it. There is some more differences. Actually, there is quite a few differences between a commercial and mil-spec tube, but the easiest way to identify one is to just look at the very rear section. If it's completely flat, it's a mil-spec tube, and if it has a bit of a slant, it is a commercial tube. So that is the easiest way to tell. You can measure diameter and that sort of stuff if you really want to be sure, but that generally will tell you what you need. For my own recommendations on stocks, I would probably say something like the Magpul's CTR, or really most of the stocks in Magpul's catalog would be good, with the exception of the PRS earlier, because as I said, kind of those longer range stocks have, I think, a lot more features than you would really ever need, and with that just excess amount of attempted features, they just don't really do anything too well. main reason I don't have any Magpul stocks on hand is really just I quite like the HK stocks. They do everything well that I'm looking for. I like the look of them, and they are certainly well built, and they have very, very good quality control. On that note, I've never really had any issues with quality control from Magpul either. I do know there are other stocks out there that, you know, maybe they would kind of fit the criteria of what I talked about for being a good stock in this video, but they may not have good quality control. You know, kind of a tertiary feature that you might want to think about with a stock that I didn't really talk about here because it's not really a feature per se, but that's just how well does it fit to the buffer tube? Is there slop in it? Because obviously it's not something that's going to impact your shooting too much, but it is annoying if the whole stock is just wobbling around on you all the time. And that's just something I've never ran into, ever, even after significant use on any of these HK stocks. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all found this informative. Let me know if you have any other questions, or if you have any other insight on points that you look for in stocks, or something that you think I maybe missed. Would love to hear it in the comments below. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next one.